All right. So as those of you who were here for the first part of this series, you can see I haven't changed my jacket or anything. I'm still sitting here in the same spot, but I decided not to torture you, so I'm going to try another half hour's worth. I have enough questions on this in the second group to possibly do 2 programs, but I'm not going to try to force it in, so I may wind up with 2 more. I'm not going to try to force it into 1 more. In any case, we're talking about the mind of the Impressionist. We're talking about the ways of the Impressionist, the thinking, the mindset. I don't know all those words, but the behaviors that reflect those things, the abilities. We could talk about the abilities. Some of this is, like I say, one of them is getting right to the point. These are abilities, but they're things that we do. These are just simply consistently part of our construct, our behavioral construct. If you want to say just method, that would be fine. So this is part 2. So let's just pick up where we were and begin talking about, let me get it up here on the board. All right, there it is. And let's just keep talking here about where we left off. No, not a class 5 hours. So we left off. So here we are. All right, so now here we are. So you see that I'm talking about points. So now what you have to be able to do is adjust a single aspect of a spot without losing all the others. And we talked about this earlier when I said you're backstraggler. You have to name what it is about the area that you're changing, so that you're not changing the entire area and doing more stuff and wrecking more than you improve. So naming it, so adjusting a single aspect of a spot without losing all the others. So if it's just the angle or some part of the shape that's off, but not the effect and not the edge, then you'll correct the shape, bringing back the edge, and make sure you're maintaining the effect, the light effect, okay? And then you're out of there, right? Now you're going to then go and look for the backstraggler again while watching the whole, and it may not be in that area anymore. And if it still is, and it's still in that part, well, then you'll say, oops, I guess I still have a color issue or whatever else it is. You're going to deal with that. Name it and adjust it. But limited adjustments of value only of a note. You could say chroma only of a note, color, hue only of a note, or the angle only of a curve. And when I talk about a curve, by the way, it might, like if you saw a curve here, I don't know if you can see a curve there in my hand, you see this curve here, you can say that you can see this whole, or this set of wiggly curves, or even the whole hand. You can see this has a tendency to be an angle, the whole curve itself from some point to some point. You'll see an angle there that relates to vertical, right? So if you have that wrong, you don't have to paint the whole hand out. You have to correct that. But there's a whole bunch of stuff you may have to do to put it back together if you find yourself moving it very much, right? In fact, you will have to put it back. And tying it on is a big thing that you have to be skillful at. All right. You have to create the discipline of seeing relationally to the whole. Okay, this is just fundamental, like these things that we'll keep weaving in and out of everything we say. But create the discipline for yourself of seeing relationally to the whole, to sets, and to a single other element, okay? You see what I'm saying? So when there's a color note sitting there, it has context. The context is what it is in the whole. But there's also a more handleable context, which is what is it doing as a red in relation to the other reds. And then there is just what it is in relation to one other thing. So it might be that it's a size that lines up with something else somewhat similar, or that they interplay in some way where it's the size and the other one. And for example, if it's a value unit, then it will show as a size, and if it's a size, you'll see its relationship to one other place. And I have a relation, of course, to lots of other places. But so you can do it one-off, this to this. You can do this to this to this to this. And you can do this thing while you're only watching the whole. But at the end, everything you do you should always come back and review to see whatever relationship you improved, and make sure that the whole is actually maintaining its unity. All right, getting right to the point. Now, that's the same thing as I was saying before when I said to you, you have to, well, it's not the same thing because there's a nuanced element of it. But when I said when you find the backstraggler, you have to then think about that and say, so it's this area, it's funny over here. In other words, you have the flock and you see this little thing sort of there's something funny happening down there. Then you have to get over there with your eyes. You have to say, now what is that? Is that a values thing? That's where you have to know how to name the pigs. Is that a values thing, a shape thing? No, and then the pigs are, just as I said, limited to us in the way it's the ocular world, right? So it's values, colors, sizes, etc. But when you go there, the idea of getting right to the point is don't go down there to paint the area all over again. Just limit yourself to, well, what was wrong about what was wrong. Then on that point, you say, okay, so that was a location problem. I have to move this to a better place. So have a concept, get a new concept of the thing while you're watching the whole, while you're seeing the relationships from other stuff. Get a concept of that and then move it to that place, right? And don't be doing 10 other things. Don't start painting it as an object. Okay, just all you're going to do is move an effect, move something over, and you're going to then redraw whatever is associated with the area that has to be brought back into unity with it. That's the proof that you're right. If you don't follow up with those things, you won't actually be able to see that you're right about it. But get right to the point. Don't mess around there making stuff and things and by the way, don't start wandering from there. Just make sure you always come back and refresh the idea of the whole. Make sure you're maintaining your vision, your grand vision. The Impressionist avoids putting down notes, shapes, etc., that don't exist. I don't know how many people, I mean, most of my students, I'm sure I did the same thing, are drawing stuff falsely, right? In other words, you're making shapes that aren't even there. You're unaware of it. And so you're always wanting to say, well, what did I just do with that mark? Well, that mark, for example, if you just put a spot somewhere, that mark has a right relationship to this spot and this spot and this spot and this spot, right? And your job with that mark is to make sure that you don't just put it down and then move on to something else. And don't put another one down and move to something else. But your job is to correlate it, okay? And again, everything is about context again. So bring it into context. Don't just go around making stuff. Don't make a color and hope, okay? And don't put off making the adjustment to any note you put down until it conforms or till it causes other things to conform. That does happen. That's where you need to keep flexible. Okay, so that's sort of a self-evident thing, but but a lot of people do think the Impressionists just paint sort of randomly, sort of plausible stuff, flopping things around this way and that way, and it sort of has a nice feeling about it. It feels like an Impressionist painting. That's not the authority of truth is something that we also are occupied with as Impressionists. We're not out there doing that. Get that out of your mind if you're an amateur who thinks that. Okay, then knowing how to paint wet into wet. Now, we talked about this last week, and it's a self-evident thing. You have to be able to paint wet into wet, right? The surface, I mean, and by the way, I say that, you theoretically could just put down blobs, 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 and Monet is almost that guy. It's not like he's much painting wet into wet. He's mostly doesn't care. He's just putting down spots and whatever, however he can get them down there so they're not dirtied up. So you could argue that, but in the Boston school, that's a way of doing it. But in the Boston school mindset, there is a best practices thing that has a surface issue. Now, the way we were taught it was undoubtedly through the classical sort of training that just goes with all sort of Western art. Typically it is wet into wet joints and stuff like that. And the idea of drawing with the darks, all those things. But I'm just mentioning that because it's a skill that is, you have to have it. You have to be able to do it, whether you use it at all times or not. It's not the point. And to do that, you have to find a workable viscosity for the pigments. And of course, we talk about the ability to paint a wet into wet joint without creating ridges. That's where you do tend to get ridges, is either using too much paint, like in the shadows, and you're getting ridges in the claw marks of the brush, which will be picking up light and destroying the unity of the shadow and the atmospheric qualities. But the other one that's most typical is you have a wet pile of wet paint, and it's too thick, and you're going to draw with darks that are too thick, and you bring them up together, and you're going to have this magical ridge, this pile of paint that picks up light from every direction or any direction. All right, now these are just standard old things that would apply to any kind of painting, any kind of wet into wet painting. Now, I was just going backwards. Knowing the difference between the givens and the variables, I already talked about that. Where am I? How did I get lost here? Okay, so that was that. I seem to be in a place where I've duplicated some efforts, and I don't have the time. There's too many words out here for me to think it through right now. So that was where we were. So let's just go to the next one. So we're talking about getting light effects now. Can you do that? Do you know how to get light effects? I remember with Brackman having this experience where I suddenly realized I wasn't even making an effort to get light effects. I was trying to paint the thing, just blank brain. And then Brackman pointed at a painting somebody had done. He said, "Look, this person has a light effect." You have to be able to do that when you need to do that. So, and every dark meeting every light has the light side of it will have an effect on your eye. And when you're looking at the whole, the more chromatic thing will be causing light effects and so on. Will have the effect of being lit. So you have to be able to manage whatever aspect of the painting is producing the light effect. Sometimes it's just getting the edge, the right sharpness with the contrasting values as they're meeting. But that's something you have to be able to do, but you have to be knowledgeable about it, and you have to be on top of it for every minute. Every area has a light effect, every spot, every place, and every spot has something to say about the light. And you have to be able to handle it. So you could say there's a lot of complexity there that I could talk about. But that's the beginning of it. So don't underestimate what it is we do. Now, the visual world, half the beauty of it, in fact, I can hardly look at a setup if it doesn't have something about it that pleases me in terms of light, right? There's something about light that is like, somebody said the Boston School was about painting the light. There's something magical about it. That's really true. And I find that irresistible myself. But letting effects lead locations. Now, this is a technology, right? I try to teach this to my students, and I hope you guys are listening. I hope you guys are listening to this. But you want to be able to get your value relationships right. And don't worry about having them in the right place. You won't be free to get them right. So get them right and then have the skill to move them into the right location. More than once if necessary, okay? The second part of this is letting your eyes find the adjustments of both location and effect. So you put down something you believe is plausibly the effect, then you take in the whole and you realize, no, one of these has to get darker, or the other one has to get lighter, or the effect, something's got to change because this light effect is not strong enough in relation to other things in the picture. And you have to have the ability to then make the adjustment right there on the spot until that relationship is right. And the effect relationship, that's one of those things that gives you this push-pull, right? The projectiveness of spots. Now, I'm not going to tell you it is the definition of front and back in a picture, except ocularly, and it for sure is. The projectiveness and you might say the lostness of low contrast, the distance of low contrast things versus the high contrast popping things. That stuff does create, that's one of the architectonic elements that we play with. Reminding you to watch Hildebrand to understand that more. But let your eyes find the adjustments, okay? So sit there, let yourself see it, and then say, more dark, more light, more edge, more whatever, and we'll ask the question. Are you asking the question of the whole? Should you be, you're saying to the thing. That's actually a behavior that I find useful, the idea of asking questions of it. You would place something on the page and you say, to that spot, that effect, between 2 points, you say, should you be more left or more right? And you can ask the spot, and it sort of it objectifies the problem. I find that a really useful one when you're trying to let your eyes verify that the location is right. But then your eyes should have a discipline of saying, but in relation to what, right? So that point is always in relation to left and right. These two places are fixed. So in relation to the whole, this thing should be further left. In relation to this size versus that size, if you have a point, say where my thumb is, so you have 3 points, finger, thumb to finger. If you have a spot like that, the location of this thing here, that's a function of this width to this width, right? Those things are other things that you're trying to get concepts of. And you say, should you be wider in relation to that one, or should you be narrow in relation to that one? That kind of stuff is the eyeball adjusting. You objectify yourself and you're asking visual questions. That's our world, the visual questions. Now, it's the world of anybody who's drawing too, but it's our world exclusively. It's what we do and not three other things. We don't take measurements with devices. By the way, we do take measurements with devices after the fact, because our goal as students of painting is to have our eyes trained so that to be relational. And the truth is in the relationships. So we study the relationships of things. And as I said, the relationships of a particular note to 3 and 4 and 5 different notes is going to make that note the right note. That's context being everything. So here's that next point, right? Reviewing relational context at all times. Just keep on reviewing, right? Every time you put a note down, it's got context. It's either right in context of other things, or it's not, it needs to be adjusted, or the other things need to be adjusted. And that's the flexibility world, again, that you're living in, that you're trying to stay in all the time. Trying to maintain the unity of the whole. Don't want to lose the best qualities of the visual impression. And that's where you also want to not be hanging on to your precious darlings, this thing you believe in. If it turns out that thing is an obstacle to context and to the greater beauty produced by how the relationships, then you would change this thing that you selected at the beginning. So I'm sitting in a cold studio, and all of a sudden the heat is working. It's getting nice and toasty. So much, though, I'm up feeling like I'm sweating it. It's funny how that has a psychological effect, even on your arguments when you're talking, right? Correcting by first projecting. I call it postulating, putting a thing out there, and then following up with context. So that's a summary of what we just talked about. First, somebody said it was like jazz. Somebody sits down and puts out a phrase, a musical phrase, and then he starts building on it, and the other guys come in with the other instruments, and they start playing around in it and around it, and unifying around it, or extending the idea. But this idea is like, when I say projecting, we're actually trying to make a statement, and then we're trying to get the relationships. And somebody else told me that they thought that, with the background in music, said that they thought that's what that resembled. Okay, moving 3 steps forward, 2 back. You're always trying to make headway, but you've always got to recheck yourself. And if it means changing 2 and 3 other things that you already thought were coming around pretty well, you don't have a problem with that, because you're trying. The grand unity is the mother lode. Okay, so you're willing, always willing. Okay, so don't be. That's a political idea, right? I think the communists used to say that, but it's probably from another idea. Oh, what in the heck did I write? Sorry, I must not have been able to see my keyboard. Employing trial and error as a plan. So most people are horrified of the idea they might be making a mistake, so they're mixing, trying to get the right color. Instead of putting down a color note and watching the canvas and seeing the context and then seeing how the note must be then. And the same thing we do with placement and everything else. So trial and error, I always say that every mark is a question mark. That's first a question mark. So you put it out there, especially the color values. You put them out there and you start having this discussion. The darkest, when you're keying, that's the first thing you're doing. You're putting out the darkest, lightest light, say. You really are asking yourself a really big question that isn't going to be resolved right away. You're going to have to get more things into the picture before you can say for sure that that's right, and therefore you're doing what we're calling trial and error. Yeah, so don't be afraid of mistakes. There are no mistakes. So what there is experience and a fulcrum for the adjustment. Okay. So it's information seeking by speculation. A pig in a poke is an interesting word. You're putting something down, not sight unseen, but that's what pig in a poke is. But you understand that there's this idea of projecting in the sense of speculation. You project a possibility. You postulate. And then you are waiting for data to prove that you're right. And all of painting is rather like that. The visual, that's discovering the unity of the big impression, providing that something in you owns that idea while he's watching nature, or has been conscientious enough to not want to be. Don't get confused about whether you should be controlling this. You're just managing it, right? Beauty is there. And your job is, can you bring it, right? If you're following me, that either what you set up is beautiful or nature itself is beautiful, any which way it works. At that point, your job isn't to suddenly make these outside the box decisions just because of what you want. Except in the sense that it's what you want is conforming. What you want is like, oh, look at how this. I've never seen it do it like that before. And then what you want is to bring that and show people. All right, and let's see how much time I have here. I'm in 20 minutes now. I got to see if I have Are you going to move? All right, give light effects. All right, I have time to do this last one. Okay. So, good. So now you also have to know how to generalize without being simplistic, because there are going to be passages, especially in the lay in an Impressionist painting, where you're going to have to, you need to get the canvas covered. And my approach to it is get the canvas covered in the first day. So you can, so that's what a good start is. It's got enough data so you can see whether this picture is going to be worth painting. This is my model, right? And this means there's going to be areas that you're going to generalize. And I referred to them in the previous video on brushwork, I think, where I was showing you Vinton's ability to make sort of blotch slash combinations of stuff just to make the area look busy, but still hold the color relations of the area without going in and painting the grass, the petal of, the shard or whatever it is of grass. Shard is the wrong word. That's for glass. But one piece at a time. So there'll be areas like that, but you don't go in there and make them simplistic. So you don't paint, say, an area. You just, I'm going to paint that flat so I don't have to paint it because it'll look stupid. The general impression will be false. All right. So all these things, by the way, we have talked about somewhere or other in this thing, and but this is a way of putting it all together, rather as one sort of thought. So getting the canvas covered in a sitting without compromising anything, that comes with this territory, right? Can you do that in a sitting and still have, that doesn't mean your stuff is going to be perfect, but it's going to be in the ballpark. And I find that it's really helpful to have the most important things, I'm talking about the powerful effects, the high contrast spots, well placed. And for example, so that you're not moving them again in the next day. Certainly the next day you come in, that's going to be the first thing you're looking for. Again, when you're looking at the whole, if it's anything, I shouldn't say you're looking for it, but when you're looking at the whole, anything about the strongest players is a concern. If there's anything like that, that's a backstrike. You don't just keep going forward. Immediately you can go correct those, because that first day you're always a little bit, into hope and a few other things instead of being objective and checking yourself as much as you might. But without compromising anything. So the majors, you can only do majors, but the majors have to be right in relation to each other. Major values, major masses, major colors, and the majors in terms of the power, light effects, and so on. Trusting but verifying with context. So you put down a note, you mix a note, you put it down, you're pretty confident about it, you put it down. But you don't just live with it, right? And we've mentioned something like that before. So these things are weaving back in and out through our discussion. But you're verifying with context. You immediately look into the context and make sure that new note is true. Sometimes that new note is truer than anything else you put up there, and it will correct the previous notes. Early on, that's inevitable, because the first several notes are just what guesses, or there's hopeful speculations. Some of the notes you first put down, remember, as I said, are touchstone notes. You're trying to say, I'm going to make this my chroma. But you may get around and realize that this other note demands that you do something different with that first one. Those things can happen. But in any context, anytime you put anything down, though, after that, everything is about, well, is it right to the most chromatic note? Is it right in value to the lightest note? And so on. Now, grasping before you start the essential beauty of what you're seeing, so that you'll know when you've accomplished it. That's one of our people are saying constantly. Brackman said it takes two people to make a picture: one person to paint and the other person to drag him away when it's done. You should know when a painting is finished, and that is when it has accomplished the mission, the visual mission. And the mission was, what is the beauty I'm trying to convey? What is the essential beauty? What is it about this thing? Because we're not painting this thing like a photograph. It's always something about this thing, okay? Right? So it's derivative, but it's also true, which is a very interesting problem, I should say, which we've talked about before. And then finally, maintaining a recognition mentality. And this is a fun one. If you haven't observed it, if you haven't seen the thing as a whole, you won't recognize it when you see it. I refer to you when you're talking to somebody you just met and you'd like to remember. You think you're going to meet them again. When you go to such and such a place, you want to recognize this person that you would like to know better. and you want to recognize them, you'll look at them. You might say peculiar, look at them in just with that in mind of taking it in, so you'll recognize it when you see it. We do the same thing with the big impression with the look of nature. And but then what happens is you need to be putting notes down with the idea of, I don't recognize that note. And you do that with every concept you come up with, right? And make sure you follow up with, all right, if you see an angle, you have a concept of that angle, then make sure you look at whatever you drew, make sure you recognize on the canvas what you thought you saw. Right? In other words, make sure, debrief yourself a little bit, and make sure you take the time to verify make sure you recognize that before you walk away. When you say it, suddenly you say, there it is, that's what I meant to say. Then you can walk away and you can look at the whole and correct yourself if needed. I say, I mean, literally look back at the panorama of the whole. And that's what I mean, then paint till you see it show up. Keep working at it until it shows up. All right, because you'll recognize it when you see it. All right, well, these are just a handful of those kinds of things. And so I'm hoping that's a little bit helpful. We managed to get both of these in, or all of this in, under around 30 minutes each one. So I'm very pleased with that. Checking back to see if there's anything I've left out. I think I've covered it all. Yeah. So good. That was excellent. Just 2 videos. That's my series on the mindset, etc. of the Impressionist, the stuff that's going through your mind, and the skill sets, whatever you want to call them, sort of behaviors. There's something about a mindset that does imply a behavior. When you're of such and such a mind, you will do this and do that, because those are the things that go with that mindset. So if I haven't even begun probably to cover the territory. I'd be interested in you guys who look at these things to mention something that's come to you. And let's see if that's something that I could say, yes, too. But they're whole different ways of thinking. The outline-based model, modeling the form and stuff, it has some of the same content. But ours is exclusionary, right? It does exclude a lot of the stuff, like knowing anatomy. You see that discussion doesn't come up except us in a negative way, in a pejorative way. All right, well, that'll do. And okay, and I haven't said much about it, but we are trying in the next, in about a month or so, maybe less, to go ahead and get another live one going. So as I said, a lot of the stuff in these 2 videos in this series would be the kind of stuff that might make for good conversations, or something you misunderstood. I mean, after thinking it through, by the way, don't throw at me half-baked questions. Think them through, paint with them, do stuff with them until you understand them. But if you just don't understand something at all, do get back to me. Or if you want to suggest another take on it or any of those things, let's have the conversation. Okay. Okay. This is the conversation of the guys for whom everything is ocular, right? It's the science of appearances. It's the impression of the eyes, the data, the pure data on the retina mindset, the stuff that goes with that territory. And I wish you well in the pursuit of that. And it is absolutely, no matter what else you ever do, it is absolutely what the basis of everything in terms of the human eye. So, and in painting, I mean, so we're transferring data from the retina. And so the retina has very limited stuff. It's a screen, right? And so go back to Hildebrand, enjoy that too. All right. Okay, good. Well, we'll see you in the next one then. And I think I'm dragging it out to make it 30 minutes long. I don't mean to be. Yeah. So thank you again for subscribing, sharing, the comments, questions, all those things, and liking. Every time you get a chance, though, if you would forward this to people you know or who might appreciate it, put it on if you want to, put it on your Facebook or whatever. It's much appreciated. All right. And otherwise, good luck. See you in the next one.